G'day, Michael here. We've got a storm going on, so you can probably hear that in the background. Yeah, I'm just making this little video to help explain how, the basics of an in-feed table, out-feed table alignment on what's called a jointer or a surface planer. This little guy's part of a combination machine that I have. It's 18 inches or 450mm, Felder brand happens to be. I'm going to try and direct it towards people that are completely unfamiliar with the machine and begin at some, a fairly beginning point. This is a machine which has a considerable amount of power, has to be able to do the work. So that means anything that it does involves a lot of force and potentially a lot of hazard. And as there are, in this case, 4 cutters on this cutter block. Oops, careful, I have my hand. The amount of material these machines can take off is very, it's a large amount of material, particularly in the way of fingers and elbows and all that sort of thing. There is a rule on bending right now, never to have any metal on a machine of this kind. The only metal I have here right now is, of course, the wire in this pair of earmuffs, which brings me to another point. When you're working with these machines, they can throw chips of material in all sorts of directions, in unpredicted ways, particularly a loose knot or something like that can be projected in any random direction. So it's worthwhile having some basic protection for your face. I use a full face shield, some people just use goggles, some people just wing it and have things fly in their eyes. Not a good option. But as this face shield is designed to operate, resting itself on the crown of your head, earmuffs that straddle over the top of your head, such as I've grabbed up here, obviously interfere with the assembly of the face shield. So you've got the face shield and the earmuffs trying to occupy the same space on your skull. This is a well-worn pair that I have. It's designed with the framing to go behind the head, so it doesn't interfere with the face shield. So obviously that's giving me full protection without any major hassles. I use dust extraction, so dust's fairly minimal. If you're in a position where you can't use extraction, obviously do something about protecting yourself from any large amounts of dust. Just forgive this Harley driving past. Okay, so that's protection for your own head. Another big part of protection for your body is, of course, what you do with your hands. And I guess habits are the first thing that will protect you. My father, being a cabinet maker before me, made a rule, very strict rule in the workshop: you never ever lean on a machine. I actually feel apprehensive because it's so built into me right now, even though the machine's off. Because one day the machine will be running or still just spinning down after having been turned on, and there might be other noises around. You may not realise you may not realise it's running, and you'll could be caught in a position, if you're leaning on something, that it might bite. I've heard of stories, luckily nothing to do with me or anyone I know, but obviously it affected someone to have made the story, of course. They leant on a machine, happened to be a jointer, and their elbow landed on the cutter block that ate their elbow. It's quite a hazardous situation, having cutter blocks that can be operating on a static object that you think you can lean on. So really, grinding in that habit of staying the hell away from the machine, do not lean on them other than a conscious thing. Like you may want to be gaining your balance by leaning against the machine with your eyes on the machine. That's very, very different to looking the other way and leaning on it. So it's a really good habit to train yourself. It's a machine, I don't lean on it, whether it's active or not active. Just stay the hell away from it. Another good thing to protect your hands when using the jointer, if you are working with relatively small parts, I'll just grab the part. Please note, rough piece of timber. You do not want to have your hands anywhere near the cutter block. You can bring the part to the cutter. If it's long enough, get it to a point where it's past the cutter block and onto the outfeed table. When there's a suitable amount, I normally leave about yay much distance before I bring my second hand into use. Where you have a short piece like this, this kind of tool, I don't know what you call it, I'm going to call it a push stick. Basically, I don't know if you can see that, provides a bit of a hook on the back of the sole of the push stick, and a flat surface so you can control a little bit of the tilt. But notice everything's generating a distance between my hand and that cutter block. So bringing it over the tool is relatively safe to be feeding through using this device rather than having your hand anywhere near here. There's quite a lot of things that can happen. You could all of a sudden lose friction on that part, slides, your hand is in the cutter block. Or the piece itself fractures up because there's a bit of short grain, it spits out that short grain, and of course then your hand's vulnerable to being presented to cutter block. Unfortunately, this cutter is very, very blunt. I've just recently done a job with recycled timber, and that is extremely abusive to the cutting tools. So I can't show you a machine in a perfect condition, but I can probably show you some errors with a bit of luck. I'm hoping there's quite a few errors on that cutter block with wear and tear on the blades. Pretty much most of your wear tends to happen towards the centre whether you like it or not. I tend to try, and because most planks are sort of half the width of this cutter block, I tend to work in two areas. On this front edge, the front half of the cutter block with using the jointer, and as this is an under and over, when you flip up the tables it becomes a thicknesser. So I try to use the thicknesser on the second side. So I'm kind of evening out the wear, but it doesn't always work out that perfectly. And if you've got larger planks than half the width, you end up doubly wearing the centre whether you like it or not. In any case, random chance, how all things work out, you tend to wear out the centre more than you do the edges, although the rear edge is probably the least worn. Now, what this whole video is about primarily is the alignment. I don't know whether you can follow this with my description. Maybe I'll zoom in a tad. Just give me a second. Okay. You've got two tables, this being the in-feed table and this being the out-feed table. The cutter is rotating this way and the part is fed over the cutter block like that. Okay. Now, the cutters, as they enter the material, maybe I'll grab something to draw on, where have I got something? Here we go. Very simple symbol. This is the out-feed table. The cutter block doing its thing. Very badly done. That's the sweep of the cutter, that represents the front edge of the cutter. And this is the in-feed table. The timber is presented from this side, and of course that would take a circular cut out of the timber. But more than that, as the cutters are actually sweeps, short sweeps, there are ripples created in the piece of timber. I don't know how well that shows up there. I hope that's clear enough. It's very hard with video. So the faster you feed by hand, the bigger and deeper these ripples become. So feeding consistently as you're passing the timber over, as consistently as you can, will improve the precision of your cut. Obviously, if you speed up and slow down, where you're going fast, the ripples will be very long and deep. If you're feeding very, very slowly, the ripples will be almost non-existent, and there'll be many of them. So there are a lot of things that create errors on jointers. The speed at which you feed is one of the many. Also, the cutter, even if it was perfectly sharp in inverted commas, cannot be in line for that very reason with the out-feed table. It has to be a little bit proud so that the, I'm going to call it the net effect or the average effect of the cut then would produce a relatively straight result. The in-feed table is more or less a guide to get you running, but it's actually the relationship between the cutter block and the out-feed table that determines the final precision of your cut. If the cut only ever produces a hump and there's nothing you can do about it with driving the machine, then you've got your out-feed table a little bit too high, so it's progressively riding upwards as it comes out. You can imagine if the piece is passed over the jointer and the cut is, whatever that distance is, if you set it for say 2 millimeters, taking 2 millimeters off, but then it's riding firmly on this and there's a slight amount of lift generated, you'll progressively produce a convex on the underside of the timber. If the outfeed table is too low, it will produce a concave. And so obviously the relationship between this cutter and the general line of the outfeed table determines how straight your product ends up being. Now, a little trick that is commonly used or done, or whatever you want to call it, is a pass where you mark, say I'll use this piece of timber assuming it's quite straight, which it should be. Place the piece of timber, I'll just move the white, so see how well I can focus that. There we go. I've got a mark on the piece of timber that lines up with the outfeed table. Now bringing the cutter forward, now it's blunt, so it's not picking up that piece. So this is no longer a useful jointer in this situation. Perhaps on the back where it's nowhere near as worn, we may get a better result, or it may be worn too. No, it's about out of adjustment. Could also be that one cutter blade's out of adjustment. No, the adjustment's pretty good. They're all behaving much the same. Okay, so in that event, we'd release the outfeed table. As you can see, it's beginning to catch there. I'll just see if that's focused fairly well on that. Yeah, that's right. Beginning to catch. That's giving about, I'll say 5mm travel, which is probably about 3/16 in the old currency. That'd be a good starting point, and then I'd actually run it based on how sharp the cutters are. You'll get a certain result. Now these are disposable tip cutters. I tend to hone them between times to freshen up the edge so I can reuse them rather than throwing away the cutters. You can usually get 2 or 3 reasonably good runs out of the cutters. See how the next cutter goes, picks up the same. This one's still a little bit back. This method actually picks up a very, very high accuracy. Maybe what you see as 5mm might only be 0.05mm of actual protrusion of a cutter, depending on the sweep of the radius of the cut arc and so forth. But I'd probably use that as a starting point, but that would probably be still a little bit too high on the outfeed table. It probably still needs to go down a little bit further. From experience, it's usually a little bit too tight. Okay, let's try that. As you can see, I've got a bit of a different grab on the different cutters. That one's behaving about how I'd hope it would do. So I've got 2 cutters doing that. With the screw adjustment, it'll be very, very hard to perfect that difference between the cutters. When you're hand grinding cutters, you'll actually change the size of the cutter, and it'll be quite a wild thing to reconcile when you're actually inserting the cutters. Okay, let's see how this goes on the back. It's doing a similar type of a catch, that shows it really well. Okay, so that is a reasonably good alignment of the in-feed and out-feed tables. The out-feed table versus the cutter block. What can be a problem with different machines, this one's been pretty good usually, but we've had other machines where we've actually had to shim the in-feed versus out-feed table quite a bit to get them parallel to each other. What can happen is if they're a little bit twisted relative to each other, you can end up with the board going through and twisting as it goes through the machine. I'm trying to bring that's too far. An engineer once told me that if you imagine all this stuff made out of rubber, you'll have a better idea of how it behaves. Now you can see that's quite nicely aligned. I mean, it's probably 10 years ago I actually aligned it. The machine that we had was a 500mm wide machine, slightly wider than this, and It was with the shims, we had to actually buy special shim brass, and it took a while to get it all right. Whereas this was, basically fiddle around for sort of half a day to get it right, and it works pretty well. It's exceptionally good for a combination machine. Oh, I hope that's of use to you. Yeah, I think that's kind of adjusting what we need to adjust there. With honing, I think that's another process altogether. I might do a more involved video for that. Okay, thanks for that. I'll catch you later.